Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Carrie Rosen, and on behalf of the Gutstein Museum and the History and Heritage Committee of Congregation Mikveh Israel in Savannah, Georgia, I would like to welcome you to today's program, Getting to Know the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. We will join the museum's executive director, Kenneth Hoffman, as together we explore the history of the museum and the new vision of its rebirth in New Orleans. A few housekeeping details before we start. You can use the chat function throughout the program to post comments and questions for our host. And you can also raise your hand if you have a question and our host will recognize you. But please keep yourself muted if you're not asking a question. And there should also be time at the end for additional questions. I'm now pleased to introduce our host, Kenneth Hoffman. He was born in Houston and raised in Baton Rouge. He earned a BA and an MA in history from Tulane University, and he spent a year studying history at the University of Bristol in Great Britain. Kenneth has worked as a grant writer for the New Orleans Museum of Art and as curator of education at the Louisiana State Museum. From 2004 to 2006, Kenneth served as president of the Louisiana Association of Museums, leading the association through the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. He recently ended an 18-year tenure as Director of Education at the National World War II Museum, which he helped open on June 6, 2000. You recognize that date, everybody? Kenneth is currently the Executive Director of the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, which will open in New Orleans in 2021. Kenneth, his wife, and their two daughters live in New Orleans' Black Pearl neighborhood, yet they don't eat at Camellia Grill nearly enough. And now let's welcome our host, Kenneth Hoffman.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, Carrie, for inviting me and the rest of the committee and the rabbi for inviting me to share a little bit of history of the museum and get everyone excited about a very exciting place that's going to be opening in just a handful of months. Let's say maybe two handfuls. No, I think one handful. I think we're going to open in definitely one handful of months. We will be open in New Orleans for you to come once you feel comfortable, once you're vaccinated. Still going to have to wear a mask probably for a while, but the doors will be open and we'll be waiting to see you. Now, I am going to share my screen because I want to show you some pictures while I talk. So I may not be able to see if you do the little hand raisy thing, but if you do have questions or if you have stories to share, then put a little something in the chat and I'll be able to take a look at that and address that either at the end or at some point in between. So give me a sec and I will figure out how to do this screen share. Can y'all see my screen? Yeah, perfect. Wonderful. Okay. So there's a picture of our building. There's our logo. It's got a Jewish star right in the word Southern because Jews are in the South and have been in the South for quite a while. I don't know if you've ever run into anybody from, let's say, New York, who and they found out you're Jewish, and you've heard something like, I didn't know there were Jews in the South. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I'm guessing it probably has. Well, after we open, no one's going to say that anymore because they're going to know all about the Jews of the South, the contributions we have made, the mistakes we have made, but also the diversity and richness that we have added to the Southern experience and really to the American experience, because Southern history is American history. Here's our tagline at the bottom: Shalom, make yourself at home. We're not a stuffy museum. We're a welcoming museum. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be Southern. As a matter of fact, we kind of hope more people come in who aren't Jewish and aren't Southern so that they can learn some of the universal lessons that we're going to be teaching and telling about how communities can be stronger when they are more accepting and more diverse. So that's why we don't use Shalom Y'all, because A, you can't trademark it. It's a little bit overused. I'm sure we're going to be able to sell you a Shalom Y'all t-shirt or coffee mug or something, but Shalom, make yourself at home, is our nod to the Jewish part, Shalom, and the Southern hospitality part, make yourself at home. This is all y'all's museum. Okay, let's move along. First of all, it's past noon, right? It's way past noon. It's past 3 o'clock, so we can have a little fun. So I got 3 questions for you that I'm going to ask, and we're going to see how good you guys are at your Southern Jewish history. Which city had the first synagogue outside of the original 13 colonies? Was it Savannah, Mobile, or New Orleans? And if anybody wants to unmute and shout it out or just say it to yourself.
I'm guessing New Orleans.
You're guessing right. That's right. Now Savannah had a synagogue long before New Orleans, but of course Savannah was in the original 13 colonies. Mobile has a very old Jewish congregation too, but New Orleans in 1828 is when what is today Touro Synagogue was formed. So a nod to New Orleans, the home of the museum. Question 2. Which Savannah-born Mad Magazine cartoonist celebrated his 100th birthday yesterday? Was it Al Jaffe, Alfred E. Newman, or Melvin Kausnowski? Nobody?
Newman.
Nobody? What? Go ahead, Carrie.
Alfred Newman.
Alfred E. Newman. Alfred E. Newman is the What Me Worry guy on the cover of Mad Magazine. And he was also known in the early days as Melvin Kausnowski. It's Al Jaffe, who just turned 100 yesterday. Still, he's got the Guinness World Record for the longest tenure as a cartoonist. And he was born in Savannah and went back and forth between Savannah and Lithuania as a youth. And then wound up in New York and started being a professional cartoonist. So I grew up reading a lot of Mad Magazine. I think it informed my view of the world about the same amount as my studies at Tulane. Okay, let's see what's next. Last question. Oh, there we go, Al Jaffe. Last question. Which African-American musician was taken in by a Jewish family at age 7 and given his first instrument? Was it Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, or Buddy Bolden?
Louis Armstrong.
You guys know this story, right? The Karnofskys took in a young Louis Armstrong off the streets, let him ride on the back of their rag wagon as they went through town collecting rags and junk. And he would toot on a little tin horn to let people know that they were coming. For the rest of his life, Louis Armstrong wore a Jewish star necklace in memory and in honor of the kindness that the Karnofskys showed him. So I give these 3 questions and answers as a sampling of how the Southern Jewish experience is wrapped up in the American experience. You can't separate the two. And there's a lot of fun stories to learn about. These are just 3. Now, let's get to the meat of the program here. What is the South? A lot of people think different territories, different geographies are really part of the South. And nobody's right or wrong, unless you say Montana is the South. But we consider the South 13 states. We talk about Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, the great state of Georgia, Florida, even South Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And of course, the museum is in New Orleans, in Louisiana. Now, some folks have asked me over time, is this a new museum? Because it seems like I've heard of this museum before, this Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. And in a word, the answer is yes. In another word, the answer is no. The original museum was at Henry S. Jacobs Camp, which is a Reform Jewish summer camp in Mississippi. In the 1980s, when the small town Jewish populations were really declining quickly, the camp would get calls from people saying, we're the last Jewish family in Donaldsonville, Louisiana. Or we sold the synagogue building in Lexington, Mississippi to the Baptist church. What do we do with the Torahs? What do we, I have all these relics. I have all this stuff from my granddad's dry goods store. What should I do with it? And the camp decided to become a repository for these artifacts for this and to preserve this disappearing small town Southern Jewish life. And they built a museum right there at the camp. It was a wonderful place for the campers to learn about their Southern Jewish heritage, but it was very inaccessible to the general public because it was in the middle of the woods in Mississippi, and you had to have an appointment to get to it. So not many people visited. In 2012, they closed the museum and set out to find a new place for it to be where it can be more accessible. And it took them a while, but they finally chose New Orleans. And they found me working at the World War II Museum, and they hired me to help revision the museum and reopen it in New Orleans. And I'm going to show you, I have experience at Jacobs Camp because I was a camper there for many summers. I was a counselor there when I was in college at Tulane. I don't know what happened to all that hair. It's probably at the bottom of someone's pool right now. But anyway, so I took on the task of reopening the museum. First thing we had to do was find a home for it. So we will be renting for the next 15 years with 2 5-year options to renew the bottom portion of this beautiful building in New Orleans. It's about 13,000 square feet. It's not huge, but it's big enough for us to tell a lot of stories. Over the next year, we have the option to rent half of the 3rd floor. I put that in green. Everyone knows what green stands for, right? If you know someone, or if you yourself would like to see your name on half a floor of a Southern Jewish museum, give me a call. I can hook you up. Now, I don't know if you know New Orleans. Some of y'all, we were talking earlier and you said that some of y'all had lived here before or had relatives here. So I went up on the roof, I took this picture, and this gives you a sense of where the museum is. We're very close to the river. We're 2 blocks from the World War II Museum, where I used to work. We're close to other museums. As a matter of fact, they call this neighborhood now the Museum District. We're on the streetcar line. New Orleans has a very historic streetcar, so it's easy for tourists to get from the French Quarter, which is just 9 blocks away. So it's a great place, and we're really happy to be here. The building is historic in its own right because it's old, not because anything interesting happened there, but it's over 100 years old. The owners did a total renovation of it, but kept the exposed brick, kept the exposed beams. So as you go through the museum, through our galleries, there's also a wonderful sense of history just walking through an old building. This slide is not that easy to understand, but this is our floor plan of the ground floor, and I'm just going to walk you through it very quickly. We have you walk into the lobby. The lobby also serves as the museum store, and this is where, our founders wall is. This is where you'll buy your ticket and those sorts of things, where you'll meet the people you're going to the museum with. Then you go into a small theater and watch an orientation film. It's about 7. Right now, we're just now finishing it up, and I think it's going to run around 7.5 minutes. And that sets the stage. What is the Southern Jewish experience? Why is the Southern Jewish experience? Why should we care? Why did we build a museum about this? If you're not Jewish, if you're not Southern, why should you care? So we kind of lay out, here are some things to think about before you go into the exhibits. Gallery 1 is mostly 18th and 19th centuries. It starts with the earliest immigrants, Sephardic immigrants. We talk about a little bit about the Revolutionary War. We talk about George Washington's letter. I think y'all might have heard something about that. We talk about the Ashkenazi immigration, we talk about the Alsatian, the Germans and the Alsatians coming in the mid-century. And then after the 1881 assassination of the Tsar, we talk about the Ashkenazi immigration coming in, and how these people integrated into their communities, including civil war, including being peddlers and merchants, including eventually getting elected mayor. We have a map that shows over 200 Southern cities that have elected Jews as mayors, and how Jews found their place within their communities. It's mostly, on balance, a positive story. It's not 100% a positive story. Like I said, there's discussions of Jews who owned slaves and fought for the Confederacy. There are stories of anti-Semitism. But on balance, it is a positive story, and that's going to surprise a lot of people who don't know the Southern Jewish experience, who think the South, that's the home, that's the Bible Belt. That's the home of the KKK. That's where racial divisions are their strongest. And yet they will come to understand how Jewish immigrants came in to an agricultural society with their merchant skills or their artisan skills, with their merchant connections to larger cities on the coast, and added to the communities by opening stores and providing services, especially after the Civil War, when the banking system was kaput, and these merchants were able to advance the farmers their supplies and their seed for the planting season, and then wind up factoring the cotton or brokering the cotton afterwards as payback. And so there was this synergy. I hate that word, but that's what it was. There was this synergy between the Jewish merchants and the Christian planters. So we get to tell a lot of those stories. The middle gallery is called The Foundations of Judaism, and it is not chronological. This is where we tell people what Judaism is. So people who aren't Jewish are going to learn, what are the holidays? What are the life cycle events? What's a Torah? What are the values that Jews hold? But everything in this gallery is Southern. So when we say that Passover is the annual commemoration of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, it is celebrated with a ceremonial meal called a Seder. Here is a Seder plate owned by, the Shmagegi family in Odessa, Texas. So everything in there is Southern. So we're really excited about that. Gallery 3 takes us into the 20th century. We talk about the birth of Zionism or political Zionism at the early part of the century. We have a Holocaust gallery that doesn't really delve into the Holocaust, what happened during the Holocaust in Europe. We have an intro panel for that. But really what we're talking about is, how did Southern Jews react to the Holocaust? How did they try to get their family members out? What did they know was going on by reading Southern newspapers? And we also highlight survivors who, after the war, moved to the South and added to their communities. Not, the Southern Jewish experience isn't all peddlers and merchants from the 19th century. In the mid 20th century, our communities were enlivened and made better by welcoming Holocaust survivors who added untold contributions to all of our communities, particularly in their later years when they did something very important, which is they started going into schools and sharing their stories. And that is such an important thing. And of course, we're losing that and have been for years now. And there will come a time when there are no survivors, and it will move from living history to just plain history. So we have some wonderful oral histories of survivors in the South. We also talk about the civil rights movement, the good and the bad, the Jews that helped, the Jews that didn't help for whatever reason, whether they were segregationists, whether they were just cautious and ambivalent and worried that the KKK was going to bomb their synagogue, because there were synagogues bombed. And then the end of the exhibit gives people a chance to explore a little more of their own state's history and a little bit more about themselves. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. And then of course you exit through the gift shop. Very important for our bottom line. So here are some renderings from our exhibit designers. We are working with the same designers that helped build the American Museum, the National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia, as well as the World War II Museum in New Orleans and countless other museums across the country. They're called Gallagher and Associates, wonderful folks. So we have several timelines in our exhibits that just give people a sense of some of the important moments. There's one here that says 1733. I'm not sure what that's all about, but you'll have to come to the museum to find out. What can I tell you? Some of our merchant and peddler artifacts, very important part of the history. It's what we have a lot of, particularly from the early part of the 20th century. Beautiful cash registers and pictures of very proud store owners inside or standing outside their stores. We have this series of postcards of department stores. You know, maybe you started as a peddler and then you got a dry goods store, and then your son or grandson winds up opening Rich's in Atlanta, or Neiman Marcus in Dallas, or Maison Blanche in New Orleans. So there's quite the traveling from small merchant to retail magnate for some people. I'm going to tell you one quick story about a picture here. The three fellas in the middle, those are the Rubinstein brothers. Rubinstein's is still in New Orleans on Canal Street, still in this original spot, except now they've bought up like the whole block. So it's much bigger. It's men's clothing. This is from 1923. When David Rubinstein gave me this photograph, he told me the story that this was the first day that they opened, that the brothers opened. All of the boxes stacked up on the higher shelves are empty. They didn't have enough money to fully stock their store, but they did have enough money to buy a bunch of empty boxes and they wanted to look full. So that's that story. So I just love, I think, it's a great story. Some of that less happy, less proud history is the racial story. Jews were coming from countries in Europe and places where they were being discriminated against because they were Jews. When they got to the United States, especially in the South, they quickly learned that they were not going to be on the bottom of any social ladder because African Americans were. And so even though they weren't in the majority of the white Christian community, they were still white. And so very quickly, most Southern Jews adapted to that racial hierarchy. Jews owned slaves in the South right around the same percentage of the non-Jewish white population. Now, Jews who did own slaves had a tendency to own fewer because they lived in cities and towns and not on farms and plantations. But nonetheless, when the Civil War came around, they served in the Confederate Army, some rising to very high ranks. Anyone know who the gentleman is on the $2 Confederate note? Yes, sir. I can't hear you, but I can see you mouthing the word Judah P. Benjamin. Right. Yes, Judah P. Benjamin, who is was the senator from Louisiana. When Louisiana seceded, he quit the Senate. He joins the Confederate government as Attorney General. Then he becomes Secretary of War and finally Secretary of State for the Confederacy, and became known as the brains of the Confederacy. After the war, when Union troops were rounding up the Confederate bigwigs to try them for treason, Judah P. Benjamin escapes back to England, and he has a whole second life, a whole second career as a very successful lawyer. And I am told that law students in England today continue to read Benjamin on Sales, which was something he wrote. So an interesting character. In that middle gallery, Foundations of Judaism, we also display about 50 reproduction stained glass windows from synagogues across the South. We asked people to go into their synagogue, take a picture of a stained glass window that they really like, send it to us, and we would reproduce it so that it could hang from above all of our artifacts. So it's a really beautiful setting. So I can't remember if there's anything from Mikveh Israel. We did this about a year ago. We put out the call on our Facebook page and in our newsletter, and we got a nice response. Holocaust oral histories, you'll push a touch screen, you'll hear the stories. Civil rights and activism, that's Rabbi Perry Nussbaum on the left in Jackson, Mississippi. His synagogue and his home were dynamited by the KKK. Perry Nussbaum would go to Parchman Farm, which was the Mississippi Penitentiary, where they would put all of the Freedom Riders after they finished beating them up. They would put them in Parchman Farm, and Perry Nussbaum would go up and minister to them, to the Jewish ones, because many of them were young, idealistic Jewish students from up east. Interesting thing, when Perry Nussbaum's contract came up, his congregation did not renew it. They were worried. Here he was from the Bema, sermonizing in support of civil rights, which could be considered a dangerous position to take in Jackson, Mississippi. So a lot of ambivalence there. On the left, on the right is Rabbi Kahana from Houston, marching with clergy of other faiths in Selma. In the middle, this horrible tract or poster is from the National States' Rights Party, which was led by a guy named J.B. Stoner, who was born, I believe, not in Savannah, but in Lafayette. Is it called, would y'all say Lafayette or Lafayette? How do y'all say it? Anyway, we've got a Lafayette in Louisiana.
Lafayette.
Okay. So he was born right there in Georgia. Anyway, we tell some of these stories. We tell the stories of the small town Jews. This is a great little proclamation. Mrs. Stockner died. This was in 1953. And the mayor of Lake Providence, Louisiana, puts out a proclamation and says she was such a wonderful woman. All the stores are going to close for her funeral, and everyone should come to her funeral. I mean, that says something about her as a person, but it also says something about the way that Jews were accepted as part of the community, an important part of the community. We have artifacts about Jews in popular culture. Kinky Friedman, Driving Miss Daisy, Confederacy of Dunces, if you've ever read that. It's got several Jewish characters in it. So this is the way that non-Jewish people may have encountered Jews in the South. My favorite thing in the whole museum is our Croix de Jew bagel. Mardi Gras is a Christian holiday, right? It's the day before Ash Wednesday, before Lent starts. And when Mardi Gras parades first started, and the Mardi Gras clubs that they called crews started in the 19th century, Jews weren't allowed to join. But today, there are 2 Jewish marching crews, and you don't have to be Jewish to join them, but they are Jewish marching crews. There's Croix de Jew, and there's Croix de Michigas. And Croix de Jew, instead of throwing beads when they march down the street to, throw beads to the crowds, they throw these golden bagels. This is an actual bagel. They paint them gold. They lacquer them up so that they won't rot. I hope it doesn't rot. It's going to be in a case in our museum. And they decorate them. And this is quite the get. If you get a Croix de Jew bagel, then you've done well when you go to the parades. At the end of the exhibit, we have this state-by-state station where you sit down, and on a touch screen, you can push a state and explore further these 3 monitors, and you explore more about your state. On the edges, we have a direct link to the Institute of Southern Jewish Life's Encyclopedia of Southern Jewish Communities. When you push a state, I can't remember which state this is, but it's one of them. Then you can dig down further and start pushing cities, and there's information about the Jewish communities in those cities, because we can't tell every story in the museum. It's not big enough, so digitally we're able to tell more. The final activity in the museum is another interactive activity. This quilt is on display in Gallery 1. It's made in 1885 by the Jewish Ladies Sewing Circle in Canton, Mississippi. They all sat around, they all made it together to raffle off to raise money for the synagogue. So it's a beautiful piece of textile. It's a beautiful piece of crazy quilt history. There happened to have been a national crazy quilt craze at the time. But even more so, it is a metaphor for a community coming together, everyone adding something of their own creativity and their own talents, and creating something that is totally unique, maybe a little surprising, maybe a little crazy, but valuable nonetheless, that then serves to help the community as a whole. So, great metaphor. When you finish the museum, you sit down at this table, and on a touch screen, you create your own quilt square. You choose the fabrics you want, you choose the patches that you want to sew on, sew because the computer does it for you, that represent you and represent your community. So you're creating your own quilt square about your identity. And then you slide your square into the middle of the table, and guess what happens? It joins with everyone else's square. And the same thing, you get something unique, something beautiful, something unexpected, something a little crazy. But the metaphor is there, and that is, you don't have to be Jewish, you don't have to be Southern, but everybody is part of their community in their own way and is adding something to that community. So if you get the metaphor, it's very powerful. If you don't get the metaphor, like maybe this little girl in the picture, it's okay, because it's still going to be a whole lot of fun. And you can email your square to yourself and your friends. So It's a lot of fun to do. The second floor, changing exhibit gallery. It's in green because it hasn't been sponsored yet. Classroom and our offices. I'm not going to fundraise on this program because y'all are a synagogue and y'all do your own fundraising. But I am going to say this, that we have a wonderful thing that we're doing. It's called the Mezuzah Society. When people join the Mezuzah Society, it's a certain level of donation. We send them this glass mezuzah that a local glass artist makes. And we ask them in return to send us a mezuzah of their liking. Old, new, handmade. And we put it up, and we're going to put it up on this mezuzah wall. And it's going to represent our supporters. So not only do, yes, thank you for your check, that really helps to keep the lights on, but also thank you for sending something of yourself. Because how many museums can you say something of mine is in that museum? You'll be able to say this if you're in the Mezuzah Society, and you can dedicate your mezuzah to your family or your community. And it really, nothing says welcome and hospitality and home like a mezuzah on the doorpost of our house and on our gates. And so we've got about 200 folks in the Mezuzah Society so far. They're sending in their mezuzot. Interesting thing, I have yet to get a duplicate mezuzah. I've gotten about 65 in the mail so far, mailed back to me. And every time I open one up, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna have seen this one. And I open it up and it's like, oh, wow, I've never seen anything like that before. It's really cool. Last thing I've got for you is we have a newsletter. We send it out once a month. Maybe when I hire some more staff, we'll send it out twice a month. I don't know. It's called the Southern Schmooze. If you want to get it, just go to our website. You sign up for it. I send it out to you. msje.org/connect. I would love to be able to let you know programming that we're doing. The main thing is to let you know when we're going to open, because that's what everyone asks. Right now, I'm going to say something to you, and even though this is being recorded, I will deny it later if it doesn't come true, and that is that we're hoping to open in May. So it's somewhat COVID dependent, but that's the hope. It will be a soft, what we call a soft opening, which means it won't be our big gala. We're not inviting everybody to come for the big, giant scissors cutting the ribbon, because that's going to wait until the fall when more people are vaccinated, more people are comfortable traveling. But we do hope to open in May. And if you are a traveler at that point, we hope you will travel to New Orleans and come visit us. And I will leave you with the Shalom, make yourself at home tagline, because it's one of my favorite things to say. And now I'm going to stop. Oh, and there's my email address. You got artifacts to donate. You got stories to tell. Email me. I'll respond by putting you off. So don't be surprised. I will say something like, this is a great story. Thank you so much for sharing. We are up to our eyeballs in getting ready to open the museum. Can you, be a little patient? I will get back to you about the artifact you want to donate, that kind of thing. But we definitely want to hear from you. So I am now going to stop sharing so that we can all see each other and open it up to questions and see if anybody has any questions. So wait, a couple of people have put things in the chat. So Janet says the empty box history was repeated by Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus when they owned the first Home Depot. Okay, I don't know what the empty box history is. Maybe
When you
Janet
mentioned the
can tell us.
Rubinstein store with the empty boxes.
Oh,
Arthur
that
and
story.
Arthur and Bernie only had enough money for a little bit of merchandise, and they stacked the boxes up on the orange shelves.
Okay, A, I love it.
You
B,
didn't know that?
I didn't know that they did the empty box thing. That's great.
Yeah.
You need to, are you friends with
We know them, and our son is very good friends with Bernie's nephew. I mean,
Okay, well,
if you're Jewish in Atlanta, you know them, or
yeah.
you know people who know them.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Thank you. We're still raising money. That's one of the reasons I'm curious about that.
I can probably hook you up with people who can hook you up.
Okay. Well, let's.
I do have another question, if I could take my
Sure.
turn. Did you know Arthur Silverman, the New Orleans sculptor? He was very renowned. He just
No.
died about 3 years ago.
No.
No? Okay. He's he was he grew up in New York, very good friends with my in-laws, and went to Tulane for medical school, was a practicing physician for a number of decades, and then turned to sculpture. And I know he has works all over the country, but certainly in New Orleans. And I was just curious if any of his work was part of the museum.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's so much Jewish art in the world, and we're not an art museum, but we have this wonderful special exhibit space, and we definitely plan on doing some special exhibits featuring Southern Jewish artists. And we'll also be selling, pieces by Southern Jewish artists in our museum store. We're currently actually looking for specific vendors, that not somebody who's going to make something that's $10,000, because nobody buys something at a museum store for $10,000, but crafts type things, like the glass fella who makes the mezuzahs. So if you know Southern Jewish artists who may want to get in contact with me, please let me know.
Sure.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I had a question, Kenneth, on the hanging windows, pictures of the windows,
Stained glass windows.
Stained glass windows. Have you considered the possibility, because obviously a whole bunch of synagogues, and I think including ours, did not see or did not respond to your request for windows. Have you thought about maybe on keeping that going as a rotating exhibit and adding different windows to them, or enlarging it either way, so that more congregations can participate
Yes.
in that?
Yes, absolutely. That is, there are several ways. When we open, I know that on a daily basis, there will be people complaining about what we didn't show or didn't tell. And I know this because A, I'm Jewish, and B, having worked at the World War II Museum for 18 years, which is also a place where people really care about the story. When you walk into an art museum, you look at the art and you say, oh, that's pretty, oh, I like that. But you don't write a comment card that says, why did you hang that Kandinsky below the Miro? It should have been the other way around. You just don't, you don't do that. At the World War II Museum, on a daily basis, it was, why didn't you say anything about? And it was usually followed by my grandfather. And we'd have to explain, it's a big story. We have a limited footprint. We chose, the stories that we had the artifacts for that told the arc of the story, that kind of thing. So I know we're going to have the same thing. People are going to come in. How come you didn't say anything about our city, our mayor, this story, my father's store? So moving forward, we're going to have opportunities to A, do special exhibits. B, we have several iPad stations where we call them flip books, where you can flip through a gallery of images. So for instance, on our merchant store, you're going to be able to flip through and see pictures of people's stores, throughout the years. And once we open, people are going to say, oh, can I send you? I have a picture of my grandfather's store, my great grandfather's store, whatever. And we're going to say, sure. And we're going to be able to add to that. So with the stained glass windows, You mentioned a great idea of switching them out. It requires, bringing in a lift and all that. So it's not something we would do all the time, but we could certainly switch them out. And we may be able to add, like a little station where you can flip through and see other congregations' stuff that comes along after we open. There's a long answer to your very good question. Anybody else?
Kenneth, I put something in the chat about two of the images that you showed, which have connections to Mikveh Israel, just for your information. One is the playbill on Driving Miss Daisy. That playbill is also in a permanent display in our Gutstein Museum in Savannah, because Miss Daisy has a big Savannah connection. Her descendants still live here, and her brother lived here, that she was visiting in the play and the movie. That was Savannah. So that's one image. The other thing you did, you talked about Canton, Mississippi, and the ladies' quilts. A former rabbi at Mikveh Israel, Saul Rubin, his wife Elsie is from Canton, Mississippi.
Really?
So for those of you in the room who didn't know that, there you go.
I didn't know that.
Small world, the Jewish geography. You guys all know about Jewish geography. But in the South, it's even smaller. Families marrying into each other because there were very few Jewish families. It's one of the reasons when we talk about Jewish summer camping in the South, why it was so important. Because a lot of kids from smaller towns, this was the only time they saw their Jewish kids was in the summer, or during their youth group meetings and conclaves and things like that. And the way we interpret that, the way we show that is, again, we put out the word that if you went to a Jewish summer camp in the South and you met your future spouse, then send us a picture of the two of you as camp sweethearts, either as campers or counselors, and send us a picture of y'all on the bima, or as a married couple, and we're putting them together on the wall. So it shows that the camp helped to perpetuate Jewish life by introducing people that then got married, had a family, maybe sent their kids and even grandkids onto Jewish summer camp. So it's a fun way to think about the importance of summer camps for Jews.
It also was a way for people who were family, who in some cases, in my case, I met Phil Coleman, who I never heard of before when I was 11 years old at Camp Coleman. And somehow or another, we mentioned that we had, he knew I was from Savannah. He had an uncle from Savannah that lived on Victory Drive. And I said, oh, I have an uncle, last name Victor, who lives on Victory Drive also. And we put it together that we were cousins and sent notes to our parents.
And are still in contact
with
each other.
And we're back in contact with each other. They're also cousins of Margie and Joan.
Fantastic. That Kinky Friedman's folks ran a Jewish summer camp, which is yeah, absolutely. Well, y'all, this has been a treat and a pleasure for me. And I hope that Lee Shapiro is in the waiting room. He's going to be so disappointed that
Could you repeat the links and the emails?
Sure. You got something to write with? All right. msje.org/contact. And there's a blue box and it says you want to be on our email list. All it asks for is your name and your email address. And then my email is Kenneth, KENNETH @
I don't see that it's recorded.
msje.org.
Thank you.
Sure. It's been a
Kenneth,
pleasure.
before you end, how can we get access to the recorded version?
So I'm going to actually stop recording now. Hold on a second. And